Borderlands 4 is coming out in just over a month from this video being made, and the game is said to be likely one of the biggest releases of the year alongside Battlefield 4. Borderlands 4 has really everything going for it: a cool art style, interesting RPG mechanics, new vault hunters, and of course, like always, Randy Pitchford causing all kinds of problems yet again. But it's not just Randy, because later on I'll also talk about how Microsoft employees are now rallying a boycott to force Microsoft to cut ties with Israel over political conflicts too. I'm seriously not kidding about that either, that's a real thing. But the gist of this video is that all of this and more is proving that the game industry cannot separate itself from political activeness no matter really how hard they try. But this is from PC Gamer. Randy Pitchford says Borderlands 4 story is inspired by the sale of Gearbox, then glazes over and says it's about where we as individuals want to be on the spectrum of anarchy to fascism. So Randy, who's being interviewed, brought up when asked the question as to how Borderlands 4 came to be, what inspired it, and then some. To which Randy said the question he first asked the team when developing the story of Borderlands 4 was this: what's the zeitgeist of the environment we're in? Oh boy, here we go. Yeah, so Borderlands 4 took years to make, not really sure exactly how long it was, but it was clearly made in between the pandemic times, the Trump-Biden election, and the eventual re-election of Trump as well. Yeah, you probably know where this is going, but like Randy said, when they made Borderlands 4's story, they decided to take what was happening around them and then incorporate it into their game. Which never sounds great on paper, because the last thing I think we need right now is Borderlands of all things believing that they need to be political too. The story was also apparently inspired by the selling of Gearbox to Embracer Group, and then the eventual rebuying of the studio back to 2K. Yeah, it was a mess to put it lightly. After Embracer lost money and couldn't sustain itself, it led to Gearbox becoming independent, and then they eventually rejoined 2K again, where it's now a subsidiary to this day. When pressed further, Randy Pitchford would say this: there's this cultural and emotional shift in me personally, and at the studio, said Pitchford, what does it mean to trade some autonomy for organization? What does it feel like to move up and down the scale between autonomy and being organized or even being controlled? Oh boy, here we go, but Randy had more to say. On one end of the spectrum, you have anarchy, and on the other end of the spectrum, you have fascism, totalitarianism, zero freedom. It's not just about societies, that's all of us as individuals to imagine where we want to be on that spectrum and how comfortable we are. Apparently, says Pitchford, we were going through that as a company. You can clearly see how this sort of idea can easily teeter on the brink of complete utter nonsense pretty quickly if it's not handled correctly. Look, okay, let's lay the groundwork at least. The concept of totalitarianism or fascism is really nothing new in video games to be tackled as a subject. Final Fantasy VII, all the way back in the 90s, their entire story is technically about this too. Cloud and his team fighting against Shinra, a company that ruins the world's health for money gain, I get it, and also Sephiroth. But this is obviously not a real new concept of video games as a storyline, and personally, I don't think pushing against such concepts immediately means that your story will be any worse or better because of it. The fact remains, though, that the difference here is how game studios, especially narrative designers and writers, handled the subject matter back in the 90s versus, well, right now. Before, I think we can agree it was more nuanced, more intricately placed into the worlds these designers were creating. These days, for the past few years especially, the villains of many games or even movies are directly inspired by what these people oppose in the real world within our time now too. I mean, it's in movies too. Mickey 17, which came out this year, it looked good on paper, but when it actually released, many media websites started describing the film's plot as an anti-Trump bashing film that used Trump as inspiration for its villains played by A-list Hollywood actors. And following this narrative spreading, Mickey 17, once the dust settled around it, it lost around $75 million due to underperforming at the box office. The very obvious connection here was that the film was anti-conservative and all of that, and therefore many people just didn't really want to support it. Then you had games like Dustborn, which was led by a Norwegian designer named Ragnar Tornquist. Hopefully I said that right, but anyways. And if you don't know, he's also very, very left-leaning. Just looking at Dustborn, it becomes obviously very clear what they were trying to convey. But Ragnar Tornquist would be interviewed by a Norwegian newspaper back in 2018 before Dustborn was created, and was asked what the inspiration was behind Dustborn before it was announced, obviously, but he would say this: we discussed it today, actually, how we feel powerless. We are working on a game which will be a very angry political game. Unfortunately, I read the news from the moment I wake up and get angrier and angrier as the day goes on. I would go on a demonstration train for human rights, for social justice, because everything I feel is under attack from Trump, from the right, from the Republicans. When pressed further, Ragnar would then say, I hope we can make it the game that will be our voice. We will shout out to the world. Games are usually not that political, but we want to mix entertainment with politics. He continues, the goal is to have it out in 2020 before the next presidential election and make a difference. Spoilers, it did not make a difference. In fact, all Dustborn ended up doing was losing a lot of money, being made fun of by everybody on the internet. And if you go look it up on Steam right now, Dustborn has but one person playing it right now and didn't even manage 100 players concurrently at release. Why I bring up Dustborn and Mickey 17 is to convey to you guys that it's becoming evidently obvious that people are absolutely sick of the way we hate conservatives narrative that keeps happening. And also, if you enjoy the content, consider liking the video, leaving a comment, and subscribing to keep up to date. Thank you, but I just think that entertainment needs to move on from really all of this. And to this day, I still don't watch TV shows or movies if I even hear or see an article saying that it's bashing these people or these people. Because at this point, it's all just propaganda to me. And then circling this back to Borderlands 4. The point here is that Randy better hope that his game isn't a bigger budget version of, say, Dustborn, or his studio and his job will be cooked. Because Borderlands 4 was very expensive to make. According to Pitchford, the game has twice the budget of the third game alone, ranging somewhere near $300 million in total, which is eye-wateringly big. You don't need to be a math wizard to know this means that Borderlands 4 has to be a major success or heads will roll. And I am worried that since the game was very clearly made in a state where Gearbox was in turmoil from not just economic factors due to this whole publisher thing or that having problems, but that the usual motive of modern Western developers is to take the world around them and then infuse it into their games to seem timely in terms of their messaging. Unfortunately for them, the timely message right now is probably the worst thing you can do. It's not because of censorship either, it's just that people are frankly tired of it. For example, there was a new game that came out called Echoes of the End. You probably haven't even heard about it. Didn't review particularly well, but as you can see, the game is basically a God of War clone that also stars a strong biracial female protagonist who uses generic magic and swords to cut down predominantly, as you can see, white men. And if you look at its Steam chart numbers right now, it's not really doing too hot. It barely broke 500 plus players at its peak. And it's currently sitting at around the low 200s right now as I make this video. Again, even if the game isn't full of so-called woke propaganda, the point remains that people will take one look at that game and their pattern recognition signs will fire in their brains and people will and clearly have stayed clear of this game. And that's the thing, right? Randy Pitchford could say that Borderlands 4 is about fighting fascism, but unfortunately that's not really what it meant before in other games. Like I said, older games have fought fascism too, but they uniquely drew from many different cultures and experiences to form their villains. I mean, take Kefka in Final Fantasy VI as a good example of this. But these days, the term fascism, when it comes to the game industry anyway, just becomes synonymous with Trump usually, and that's pretty much it. And like I said, that pattern recognition will kick in for many people, and they have and will not support things that just keep attacking and pushing the same tired concepts that they have rejected already. And then you come to the villain in Borderlands 4, which is the Timekeeper. We obviously don't know much right now about this villain, but his name and gist gives you some red flags already. Firstly, his name suggests that the guy might have power over time, which has already been exhaustingly used as a core mechanic in many other modern stories to just make up for bad writing practices, if you ask me. I mean, Mortal Kombat had Chronica, a bald white woman who completely ruined the Mortal Kombat mythos and timeline because her powers were just introduced to simply reset Mortal Kombat's timeline for a reboot. And I fear that's what this Timekeeper guy is also going to be. Or they'll use his powers to bring back other franchise characters like Roland or Maya, who obviously kicked the bucket in previous games. Or my big fear, and I hope this doesn't happen, is the only reason why the Timekeeper is here and basically simply exists is just to bring back Handsome Jack, of course, so Gearbox can rely on him again as a villain going forward because he was their best villain in the series by a long shot and they've never topped him. My other worry is that this Timekeeper, as Randy Pitchford has explained before, is a fascist leader who can see through the eyes of his subjects and hear their conversations. Sure, it might be an allegory for big tech, but it's more likely that Gearbox is trying to use Trump or maybe even ICE as some sort of weird inspiration for their villain instead. Again, I'm not stating that as fact, but regardless, it would be annoying if that ends up being the case. To me anyways, the Timekeeper more so just sounds like the physical embodiment of, say, the UK government and their censorship on their citizens. Now, that could be an interesting angle because what the UK government is doing right now with internet safety is a good villain inspiration. Because it's neither right nor is it left leaning. It's about something people care about in censorship, but I doubt it since these games take years to make. And it's just far more likely that the Timekeeper will be some sort of Trump stand in, and I really, really hope that's not the case. As the writer of the article wrote about Randy saying the game is about fascism, as they said themselves here, I'll be honest, themes of fascism and totalitarianism feel like Borderlands biting off a little more than it can chew to me, but perhaps I'm being unfair. And I agree, I think if anything, you don't need your game to be highly political, especially right now. And the worst thing you could be doing is using your game as a Trojan horse to beat your fans over the head with forced political messaging when it hasn't worked either in the past. Because, come on guys, the whole woke thing is dead. There's no point in trying to push that anymore. Society has largely moved on already, and at this point, it's just a losing battle. But frankly, I don't think a lot of game devs in the Western sense seem to care either way. It's like they're bitter that they lost the election. And they have now made it their personal mission to make everyone else's problem by turning every single piece of entertainment that they can into some weird propaganda simulator. Again, like I said in another video about Borderlands, Randy Pitchford needs to stop talking about this game like full stop. Because every time he opens his mouth, it's just another problem that gets formed, and I truly hope that Borderlands 4 is a great game. I hope that it's not some weird woke propaganda masquerading as a Borderlands game. Because we've had enough terrible stories in the franchise, and it's really time to get this series back on track. But as it stands right now, I'm not so sure, but they're really not the only ones. This then brings me to Microsoft and how Arkane Lyon is protesting and boycotting their owners over working with Israel of all things. As seen here from GameSpot, that is genuinely what it's titled. Arkane Lyon wants Microsoft to cut ties with Israel. Like, wow, alright then, so what is happening now? Well, more activism. As seen here, the reason why Arkane Lyon wants Microsoft to cut ties is apparently that Microsoft is allowing Israeli troops to use their Azure cloud platform to drop airstrikes on people in Gaza. Although apparently the rebuttal is there is no proof of this actually happening, and this has now led to Arkane Lyon's union to form together and write a letter to Microsoft to sever all ties with the war on Gaza, as you can see here. And Arkane Lyon then claims what Microsoft has become involved in here, again, allegedly according to Microsoft, it hasn't been 100% proven, but Arkane is clearly considering it to be true, obviously, is that they're accomplices in the lives being taken within Gaza by helping Israel. Like I said, guys, nuclear territory subject matter, I know, but Arkane Lyon, by the way, are currently developing Marvel's Blade game, which you probably saw, it got announced a few years back. They've also worked on things like Dishonored and more. And as seen here, Arkane Lyon is demanding everyone who is pro-Palestine to boycott any and all Microsoft games and services in response to this information. They're literally going to war with their owners who pay their bills. Yeah, it's a mess. And the demands of Arkane Lyon are as seen here. They want Microsoft to pull out any funding or support from Israel immediately. But they also want Microsoft to denounce the war on Gaza as well. They also demand that Microsoft uphold the right to free speech, so that these people at Arkane and beyond can speak on these topics in the future without fear of repercussions. Now look, this is a mess. However, it needs to be said that as of now, Microsoft denies this despite the pushback. I'm not going to defend Microsoft, that's why they have lawyers, they can deal with that mess themselves. But what's going on here adds to what I said when it comes to Borderlands 4 and such as well, which is that there is clearly an overabundance of political activism when it still comes to the Western gaming industry today. And these people who are responsible for making video games first are instead making it their jobs to instead be activists first. Which I don't know if that's even something they're allowed to do here, but who knows? The point is that for too long, the Western game industry has become filled to the brim with activism. They've hired hundreds of these people at all of their studios across the board for years now. And now the very people that they have hired are now trying to destroy them within, which is why I don't really feel bad for even a second for people like Microsoft. Because they did this to themselves. You guys kept hiring people who were clearly activists first, and maybe game developers third or even fifth down the line of importance. And when you hire people who care more about politics and such, you get what you deserve. I'm not saying that Arkane Lyon is in the wrong here, it's in their right to do this technically, and I'm sure that Microsoft can't even really fire them because if they do, they'll probably have an even bigger problem on their hands. But the case still stands that Microsoft did this to themselves by allowing their company to be filled with these kinds of people for years. It's sort of like a guy who owns a store that's full of wood sculptures and then purposely releasing a colony of termites into his store because he doesn't want to be seen as against termites. Now his whole store is getting eaten alive. And if he calls them out, he's going to be called a bigot, like you did this to yourselves. As it states here in a GameIndustry.biz article that initially broke this story, as Arkane Lyon told them in an interview, Microsoft has failed both its teams and its customers by being actively complicit of the invasion and war crimes happening in Gaza. This is a can of worms within multiple other cans of worms, fellas, because this only goes two ways. Either Microsoft complies and cuts ties with Israel, which is doubtful because of many, many reasons, or Microsoft fires these activists and causes other activist groups to then lose their minds, and then we got a lawsuit on our hands and all the other stuff. And really the point of this video is that whether you're Randy Pitchford trying to talk about politics or capitalism or fascism or totalitarianism, and how it affects your ties to your Borderlands game somehow, which is usually about fart jokes and poop jokes, or you're these activists demanding that $1 trillion corporation that hired you to submit to your will or you'll lose your minds, the pathway is pretty clear. Which is that what happens when game development studios and publishers focus less on the importance of making politically neutral games that are meant to just be fun to make for funness sake and instead focusing on appeasing people who will literally throw you into the abyss if you even disagree with them once. These activists are not going to buy your products. They never do. They don't care about your products or your games or anything like that. All they care about is using your money, your platform, and your time and energy to elevate and push whatever it is that they're truly passionate about. Notice when I brought up Dustborn earlier, how Ragnar Tornquist, when interviewed about his game, he never once said how his new game Dustborn was about making a fun gameplay experience, or what mechanics he was going to innovate on, or how he was going to expand video games as a medium in terms of how the player interacts with the game. No, all he cared about talking about was making his game for one sole reason: political messaging, like always. And the more that becomes normalized, the more insufferable it's going to get in the future. Look, again, I don't hate Arkane Lyon. They're allowed to voice their opinions all they want. But this is frankly Microsoft's fault before anything else for hiring these people in the first place. You knew they were activists, you knew their political leanings, you knew before that ink was even dry that these people would do exactly what they're doing now the moment you did anything that they didn't agree with. So I'm not sorry for Microsoft for what's happening to them, but it has become clear that the Western industry, despite the thousands of people getting laid off these couple of years, and all these games faltering to make profits, and all these games releasing and dying immediately, and they continue to keep chasing the same things that have never worked or mattered in the first place instead of just making fun games for funness sake. And Borderlands 4, hopefully, is nothing like what Randy explained, but Randy being Randy, he continues to keep messing up the messaging around his company's game. He seriously needs to shut his mouth. And I don't mean that in a mean way. I mean just, Randy, please, just stop talking. I'm just tired of it, man. Just make good games and keep the politics separate. We know it works. Look at all the games that have done great in the last year or two alone that don't push this stuff. Until that doesn't become the status quo going forward, the deconstruction of Western gaming will just keep continuing. But what do you think? Thank you for watching. Subscribe to keep up to date. As always, have a great day, and I'll see you next time.